Pink Floyd may be known for their mind-bending psychedelic masterpieces and iconic laser light shows, but behind the cosmic soundscapes lies a treasure trove of bizarre incidents that sound stranger than fiction. From runaway inflatable pigs terrorizing London airports to Syd Barrett's haunting surprise visit while the band recorded a song about him, Pink Floyd's journey is filled with surreal moments that blur the line between reality and their trippy music. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Pink Floyd. Fact 1. Syd Barrett's unrecognizable tribute visit. During the summer of 1975, Pink Floyd was deep into recording sessions for their album Wish You Were Here at Abbey Road Studios in London, working specifically on a song called Shine On You Crazy Diamond that served as a heartfelt tribute to their former bandmate and original creative force, Syd Barrett. Barrett had left the band 7 years earlier in 1968 after his mental health deteriorated, largely due to heavy LSD use and what many believe was underlying schizophrenia, leaving behind a legacy as one of the most innovative musicians of the psychedelic era. On this particular day, while the band was focused on capturing the perfect take of their emotional tribute, a strange visitor appeared in the studio, an overweight, completely bald man with shaved eyebrows who was behaving quite oddly. The mysterious figure wandered around the recording space and at one point began brushing his teeth right there in the studio, which struck everyone as bizarre behavior even by rock and roll standards. Roger Waters, David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Richard Wright initially assumed this strange person was simply a friend of someone else in the studio, perhaps a roadie or technician they didn't recognize. It wasn't until someone finally took a closer look that the shocking realization hit them: this unrecognizable man was actually Syd Barrett himself. The transformation was so complete and dramatic that his own former bandmates, people who had known him intimately for years, failed to identify him immediately. Barrett had gained significant weight during his years away from the spotlight, had lost most of his hair, and had the peculiar habit of shaving off his eyebrows, creating an appearance that bore little resemblance to the charismatic, curly-haired frontman they remembered. The emotional impact of this moment was overwhelming for the band members. Roger Waters was reportedly so disturbed by seeing Barrett in this condition that he began to cry, while Richard Wright later described the encounter as deeply unsettling. The timing made the situation even more poignant. There they were, pouring their hearts into a song about missing their lost friend, when that very friend appeared before them like a ghost from their past, transformed beyond recognition by the years and struggles that had separated them. Fact 2. The inflatable pig that terrorized London. On December 3, 1976, Pink Floyd was conducting a photo shoot for their upcoming album Animals at London's iconic Battersea Power Station, and they had brought along a truly massive prop to make their artistic vision come to life: a 40-foot inflatable pig that they planned to suspend between the power station's towering chimneys. The concept, dreamed up by bassist Roger Waters and designed by the art collective Hypnosis, was meant to create a striking image that would perfectly capture the themes of their new album, which drew inspiration from George Orwell's Animal Farm and its commentary on political power and social control. The band had hired a marksman to stand by with a rifle, ready to shoot down the enormous balloon if anything went wrong. But on this particular day, the sharpshooter wasn't present when they needed him most. High winds began whipping across the Thames, and during the photo session, one of the pig's moorings rubbed against the rough concrete of Battersea's southern chimney, causing the tether to snap and setting the giant inflatable free to drift across the London skyline. What started as an album cover photo shoot quickly turned into a citywide emergency as the runaway pig floated directly into the flight path of planes approaching Heathrow Airport, one of the world's busiest international airports. Air traffic controllers had no choice but to ground all incoming and outgoing flights, stranding thousands of passengers while authorities scrambled to deal with this unprecedented aerial obstruction. Police helicopters took to the skies in pursuit of the rogue balloon, and even the Royal Air Force was called in to help track and contain what had become a genuine threat to aviation safety. The chase continued for hours as the pig drifted eastward across London, with bemused citizens calling police switchboards to report sightings of the floating farm animal. Eventually, the balloon came to rest on a farm in Kent, miles away from where it had started its unplanned journey. The farmer who discovered the deflated pig on his property was reportedly furious, not because of the inconvenience, but because the unexpected visitor had frightened his herd of cows so badly that it disrupted their normal routines for days afterward. Fact 3. The failed Household Objects album. Following the massive success of The Dark Side of the Moon in 1973, Pink Floyd found themselves in an unusual position where they had achieved both critical acclaim and commercial success beyond their wildest dreams, but they also felt pressure to create something equally innovative for their follow-up project. Instead of simply trying to repeat their previous formula, the band decided to push the boundaries of experimental music even further by attempting to create an entire album using absolutely no traditional musical instruments whatsoever: no guitars, no bass, no drums, and no keyboards. The concept they settled on was called Household Objects, and the idea was to make music exclusively from everyday items that could be found in any typical home, including aerosol spray cans, kitchen forks, wine glasses, rubber bands, pots and pans, and various other common household materials. The band wanted to prove that music could be created from anything that produced sound, and they were determined to make this unconventional approach yield actual songs rather than just novelty noise-making experiments. Roger Waters threw himself into the project with characteristic intensity, reportedly spending entire days working to perfect a bass-like sound by stretching a rubber band across a pencil and plucking it in different ways to achieve the right tone and pitch. Meanwhile, drummer Nick Mason attempted to create drum sounds by deadening the natural resonance of pots and pans, so they would sound more like traditional snare drums and toms, experimenting with different materials and techniques to muffle the metallic ringing that made them sound too obviously like cookware. The band spent months in the studio during 1973 and 1974 working on this ambitious project and recording various takes with names like Carrot Crunching and Papa Was a Rolling Floyd. But despite their dedication and countless hours of experimentation, the results were ultimately disappointing. David Gilmour later described the sessions as rather unsatisfying, explaining that most of the time they just ended up with plonky noises instead of actual music. Nick Mason was even more blunt about their failure, admitting that they never managed to produce any actual music, and that the most we ever achieved was a small number of tentative rhythm tracks before finally abandoning the project in frustration. Fact 4. Wine glasses as musical instruments. While Pink Floyd's ambitious Household Objects project ultimately failed to produce a complete album, the band didn't completely abandon their experiments with unconventional sound sources, and some of these techniques actually made it onto their finished recordings in subtle but meaningful ways. During the recording sessions for Wish You Were Here in 1975, the band successfully incorporated wine glasses as actual musical instruments on their epic tribute song, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, using a technique that involves running wet fingers around the rim of glass containers to create pure, haunting tones. The process of making music with wine glasses requires a delicate touch and considerable patience, as the musician must maintain just the right amount of moisture on their fingertips while applying steady pressure as they circle the rim of the glass at a consistent speed to produce a clear, singing tone. Different sized glasses produce different pitches, and by varying the amount of water inside each glass, musicians can fine-tune the notes to create specific chords or melodies that blend seamlessly with traditional instruments. David Gilmour later confirmed that they incorporated this wine glass technique into the atmospheric introduction of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, where the ethereal, otherworldly sounds help create the dreamy, floating sensation that opens the song before the more recognizable guitar and synthesizer parts enter. The wine glass tones are mixed quite low in the original album version, making them almost subliminal additions to the overall soundscape rather than prominent melodic elements, which is why many listeners have never consciously noticed their presence even after dozens of listens. However, fans who own the remastered versions of Wish You Were Here, particularly the special edition releases that came out as part of the Why Pink Floyd campaign in 2011, can hear these wine glass contributions much more clearly thanks to improved audio separation and enhanced mixing techniques. The immersion box set version of the album even includes isolated tracks where you can hear the wine glass parts on their own, revealing just how much effort the band put into creating these delicate, bell-like tones that add an extra layer of mystery and beauty to what was already one of their most emotionally powerful songs. Fact 5. Roger Waters' Deadly Tea Prank. During the early days of Pink Floyd, when Roger Waters and Nick Mason were still young musicians developing their friendship through countless hours of rehearsals and studio sessions, the two bandmates had developed a playful but potentially dangerous habit of trying to catch each other off guard with perfectly timed jokes and pranks. Waters later admitted in interviews that he and Mason would deliberately create situations that were risky for each other, finding humor in the element of surprise and the challenge of making their friend laugh at the most inconvenient moments possible. The incident that Waters would later describe as nearly killing his drummer happened during a band rehearsal when someone had just served the group steaming hot cups of tea, a common occurrence during their long working sessions in cold British studios. Waters watched carefully as Mason lifted his cup and took a large gulp of the scalding liquid, and at precisely the moment when Mason was halfway through swallowing, Waters suddenly and inexplicably said the single word yacht, for no apparent reason other than his instinct that this particular word would trigger Mason's sense of humor. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more dangerous, as the unexpected absurdity of Waters randomly blurting out yacht struck Mason as so funny that he immediately burst into uncontrollable laughter while his mouth was still full of hot tea. The result was spectacular, and terrifying. Two streams of scalding tea shot out of Mason's nose like geysers as he simultaneously laughed and choked, creating what Waters later described with animated hand gestures as two rivers of scalding tea that sprayed across the rehearsal space. Mason was in obvious agony from the burning sensation of hot liquid being forced through his nasal passages, writhing and gasping as he tried to recover from the painful experience, while Waters found himself caught between genuine concern for his friend's well-being and complete inability to stop laughing at the ridiculous scene he had just created. Waters later recalled thinking, "Oh God, I've killed him," as he watched Mason struggle with the aftermath of the prank. Though he was laughing too hard to actually help his bandmate recover from the ordeal, and Mason eventually did recover fully from what became a legendary story between the two musicians. Fact 6. The explosive concert pig mishap. When Pink Floyd embarked on their In the Flesh tour in 1977 to promote their Animals album, they brought along one of the most elaborate and theatrical stage productions of the era, complete with inflatable pigs that would float over the audience during their performances as a direct reference to the album's themes and artwork. These concert pigs were much smaller than the 40-foot balloon used for the album cover photo shoot, but they were designed to be deliberately explosive, creating dramatic visual effects when they were detonated above the crowd as part of the show's climactic moments. The original plan called for these performance pigs to be filled with mild propane gas, which would create a controlled explosion that was visually impressive but relatively safe for both the audience and the band members on stage. The propane-filled balloons would produce a bright flash and a loud bang when ignited, but the relatively gentle nature of propane combustion meant that the explosion would be contained and manageable, adding excitement to the show without putting anyone in serious danger. However, during one particular concert on the tour, someone made a catastrophic mistake in preparing the explosive pig, either through carelessness, miscommunication, or possibly even deliberate sabotage, though the exact cause was never definitively determined. Instead of filling the balloon with the usual mild propane gas, whoever was responsible for the pig preparation used an oxygen-acetylene mixture, which is the same highly volatile combination used in welding torches and industrial cutting equipment. When the pig was detonated over the audience as planned, the result was far more dramatic and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The oxygen-acetylene mixture created a massive explosion that was significantly more powerful than the propane blasts the audience and crew were expecting, producing a much larger fireball and a deafening boom that could have seriously injured people in the venue. The explosion was so intense that it shocked both the band members and their crew, who immediately realized that something had gone terribly wrong with their carefully planned pyrotechnics. And it's fortunate that no one was seriously hurt by what could have been a deadly accident caused by using the wrong type of explosive gas in their stage effects. Fact 7. Paul McCartney's unusable Dark Side interview. During the recording sessions for The Dark Side of the Moon at Abbey Road Studios in 1972 and 1973, Roger Waters came up with the innovative idea of incorporating spoken word segments throughout the album to enhance its themes about the human condition, mental illness, death, and the pressures of modern life. His plan was to interview various people around the studio, including band members, roadies, technicians, and anyone else who happened to be available, asking them deeply personal and philosophical questions about fear, violence, mortality, and other heavy topics that would complement the album's serious subject matter. Waters would take each interview subject into Studio 3 at Abbey Road, turn down the lights to create an intimate and contemplative atmosphere, and then show them flashcards with thought-provoking questions while recording their spontaneous responses. The goal was to capture genuine, unguarded reactions to profound questions about life and death, creating authentic human voices that would weave throughout the album's musical landscapes and add an extra layer of emotional depth to the listening experience. One of the people Waters interviewed during these sessions was Paul McCartney, who happened to be working on Wings' Red Rose Speedway album at Abbey Road at the same time Pink Floyd was recording The Dark Side of the Moon. Since McCartney was readily available and willing to participate, Waters saw this as an opportunity to get some interesting material from one of the most famous musicians in the world, someone whose thoughtful responses about serious topics could potentially add significant weight to the album's spoken word segments. However, when Waters played back McCartney's interview, he was disappointed to discover that the former Beatles member had approached the session as an opportunity to entertain rather than to share genuine philosophical insights. Waters later explained that McCartney was the only person who found it necessary to perform, which was useless, of course, because instead of giving honest, introspective answers about fear and mortality, McCartney was trying to be funny and treating the interview more like a comedy sketch than a serious discussion about life's deeper meanings, making his responses completely unsuitable for the somber, contemplative tone that Waters was trying to achieve throughout the album. Fact 8. The Damselfly, named after Umaguma. In 2015, a team of scientists working in Africa made an exciting discovery when they identified a previously unknown species of damselfly, which are delicate insects closely related to dragonflies, but distinguished by their ability to fold their wings back along their bodies when at rest. The research team was conducting fieldwork to catalog and study the biodiversity of aquatic insects in various African waterways when they came across this particular damselfly that displayed unique characteristics and genetic markers that clearly separated it from all other known species in the scientific literature. When it came time to give their newly discovered species an official scientific name, the researchers decided to honor one of the most innovative and experimental albums in rock music history by naming their find Umaguma, which directly references Pink Floyd's 1969 double album, Umaguma. This album was particularly notable for being one of Pink Floyd's most adventurous and unconventional releases, featuring one disc of live recordings and another disc where each band member contributed individual experimental pieces, creating a collection of music that was both challenging and groundbreaking for its time. The choice to name a scientific species after a Pink Floyd album reflects the growing trend among researchers to draw inspiration from popular culture when creating official names for their discoveries, and it also demonstrates how Pink Floyd's influence has reached far beyond the world of music into unexpected areas of academic and scientific work. The album Ummagumma itself was known for pushing the boundaries of what rock music could be, incorporating unusual instruments, unconventional song structures, and experimental recording techniques that influenced countless musicians and artists in the decades that followed its release. The fact that a small African insect now carries the name of a Pink Floyd album creates an amusing and permanent connection between the natural world and progressive rock music, ensuring that even people who have never heard of the band might encounter their legacy in the most unexpected places. The damselfly, Ummagumma, joins a growing list of plants and animals that have been named after musicians and bands, but it remains one of the more obscure and charming examples of how scientific naming conventions can serve as a tribute to artistic innovation and cultural impact. Fact 9. Money in 7008. Time created from cash sounds. When Roger Waters was developing the concept for Money, one of the most commercially successful songs on The Dark Side of the Moon, he decided to create the track's foundation using actual sounds related to money and commerce, rather than starting with traditional musical instruments. Waters took his home recording equipment, specifically his Revox A77 quarter-inch tape deck, and began experimenting with various cash-related sound effects that he recorded in his own house, including the mechanical sounds of a cash register opening and closing, coins being counted and handled, and paper money being shuffled and torn. The most distinctive element of the song's rhythmic foundation came from Waters' creative use of his wife's metal pottery bowl, which he discovered produced a perfect percussive sound when coins were dropped into it from various heights. He spent considerable time experimenting with different coins, dropping them from different distances to achieve varying tones and attack characteristics, ultimately creating a complex loop of metallic percussion that would form the backbone of the entire song and give it its immediately recognizable opening sequence. Perhaps even more unusual than the sound sources themselves was Waters' decision to structure the entire song around a 7/8 time signature, which means that each measure contains 7 beats instead of the standard 4 beats that characterize most popular music. This rhythmic choice was highly unconventional for mainstream rock music, as 7/8 time creates an irregular, off-kilter feeling that makes it extremely difficult for listeners to dance along or even tap their feet in a natural way, since the rhythm doesn't resolve in the predictable patterns that most people expect from popular songs. Nick Mason, Pink Floyd's drummer, later observed that the 7/8 time signature was particularly challenging because it was rather hard to dance to, which was an understatement considering that most people found it nearly impossible to move naturally to the song's irregular rhythm. However, this unconventional approach proved to be brilliant, as the awkward, stuttering feel of the 7/8 time perfectly matched the song's cynical lyrics about the corrupting influence of money, creating a musical representation of how the pursuit of wealth can throw people's lives out of balance and disrupt their natural rhythms. Fact 10. The secret wall backwards message. During the late 1970s, when Pink Floyd was working on The Wall, the music industry was embroiled in a major controversy about backward masking, which is the practice of recording messages that can only be understood when played in reverse. Religious groups and concerned parents were convinced that rock bands were hiding satanic or subversive messages in their songs by recording them backwards, and this moral panic had reached such heights that congressional hearings were held and various musicians were accused of corrupting young minds through these allegedly hidden communications. Pink Floyd, known for their sense of humor and their tendency to challenge authority figures, decided to respond to this backward masking hysteria in their own characteristically playful way by actually including a genuine backwards message in The Wall. but making it completely harmless and even amusing rather than sinister or corrupting. The band deliberately recorded a clear, easily understandable message and then reversed it, placing it somewhere within the complex soundscape of their double album, where dedicated fans with turntables could discover it if they took the time to play sections of the record backwards. The hidden message, when reversed and played forward, says, "Congratulations, you've found the secret message. Now send your answer to Old Pink, courtesy of the Funny Farm, Chelsea, England," which serves as both a reward for curious listeners who went to the trouble of searching for backwards content and a gentle mockery of the entire backward masking controversy. The reference to Old Pink was an inside joke within the band, since many people mistakenly believed that Pink Floyd was the name of a single person rather than a band, and the mention of the Funny Farm was a humorous nod to the mental health themes that ran throughout The Wall and much of their other work. This backwards message represents Pink Floyd's typical approach to addressing social controversies. Instead of ignoring the backward masking panic or responding with anger, they chose to acknowledge it while simultaneously poking fun at the absurdity of the whole situation. By including an actual backwards message that was completely innocent and even encouraging fans to interact with the band, Pink Floyd demonstrated that they could play along with the game while also showing how ridiculous the moral panic had become. Fact 11. Multiple minimogs for single presets. After the massive commercial success of The Dark Side of the Moon in 1973, Pink Floyd found themselves with more money than they had ever imagined possible, and this financial windfall allowed them to approach their equipment purchases in ways that would have seemed completely impractical or wasteful to most musicians. Rather than carefully budgeting for instruments and making compromises about which synthesizers to buy, the band decided to solve one of the most common problems faced by electronic musicians in the 1970s through the simple but expensive solution of buying multiple copies of the same instrument. The Minimoog synthesizer, which had become one of the most important and sought-after electronic instruments of the era, presented a particular challenge for musicians because it was an analog instrument that required manual adjustment of numerous knobs, sliders, and switches to create different sounds. Most synthesizer players had to rely on patch sheets, which were written records of all the control settings needed to recreate specific sounds. But this system was time-consuming and often inaccurate, because slight variations in knob positions could dramatically change the sound, and analog circuits could drift over time, making it difficult to perfectly recreate previous settings. Pink Floyd's solution to this problem was both elegant and extravagant. They simply purchased multiple Minimoog synthesizers and dedicated each one to producing a single, specific sound that they liked. Once they had dialed in the perfect settings for a particular preset on one Minimoog, they would place tape across all the controls to prevent anyone from accidentally moving the knobs or switches, essentially turning that expensive synthesizer into a single-purpose instrument that could reliably produce the exact same sound every time they needed it. This approach meant that instead of spending time during recording sessions or live performances trying to recreate sounds from patch sheets, keyboard player Richard Wright could simply move from one Minimoog to another, with each instrument already set up to produce a different signature sound that the band used regularly. The band reportedly owned several Minimogs simultaneously, with each one frozen in its optimal configuration for specific songs or sound effects, representing a level of equipment redundancy that was only possible because of their extraordinary financial success during the peak of their popularity. Fact 12. Claire Torry's 30 vocal masterpiece. One of the most haunting and emotionally powerful vocal performances in rock history was created by session singer Claire Torry, who was brought in by engineer Alan Parsons to add vocals to a Pink Floyd track called The Great Gig in the Sky during the recording sessions for The Dark Side of the Moon in 1973. Torry was not particularly familiar with Pink Floyd's music and had no idea that she was about to contribute to what would become one of the best-selling albums of all time, as she was simply hired as a professional session vocalist to complete what seemed like a routine recording job on a Sunday evening. When Tori arrived at Abbey Road Studios, the band explained to her that the song was about death and the journey through life, and they asked her to improvise wordless vocals over Richard Wright's beautiful piano melody that would capture the emotional essence of dying and transcendence. The band gave her very little specific direction about what they wanted, essentially telling her to sing whatever felt right and to express the feelings that the music brought up for her, which left Tori to create her own interpretation of this profound and difficult subject matter. Working completely from intuition and emotion, Tori recorded several takes of improvised vocal melodies, wails, and cries that seemed to channel both the anguish and the beauty of human mortality, creating a performance that ranged from gentle, almost lullaby-like passages to powerful, soaring expressions of grief and release. She was initially embarrassed by the intensity and raw emotion of her performance, feeling that she had perhaps been too exuberant or dramatic in the recording booth, and she actually wanted to apologize to the band afterward because she wasn't sure if her passionate vocal delivery was what they had been looking for. For this extraordinary contribution to one of music's most celebrated albums, Tori was paid the standard session fee of £30, which was equivalent to about £500 in today's money, and the band didn't tell her at the time how impressed they were with her work. She left the studio, assuming that her vocals probably wouldn't be used in the final version of the song, and she only discovered that she had been included on the album when she happened to buy a copy at her local record store and saw her name listed in the credits. Fact 13. The cow named Lulubelle III. When Pink Floyd was preparing the artwork for their 1970 album Atom Heart Mother, they turned to hypnosis. The innovative design collective led by Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell that would go on to create some of the most iconic album covers in rock history. Hypnosis presented the band with several different concept options for the cover, including what seemed like a perfectly reasonable choice for a progressive rock albumin artistic photograph of an inverted swimmer that had a surreal, eye-catching quality that would have fit well with Pink Floyd's experimental image and psychedelic reputation. However, Pink Floyd made the surprising decision to reject the inverted swimmer concept in favor of something completely different and much more mundane: a simple photograph of a cow standing in a pastoral field with no band name, no album title, and no indication whatsoever that this was even a music album rather than perhaps a farming magazine or agricultural textbook. This choice was radical for its time, as most rock albums featured either photographs of the band members or elaborate artistic designs that clearly identified the music as belonging to a particular genre or style. The cow that ended up gracing the cover of Atom Heart Mother was not just any anonymous farm animal, but had an actual name, Lulubelle III, indicating that she came from a line of cows that had been given the same name by their owners. Unfortunately, like most cows, Lulubelle III had a relatively short lifespan and is no longer alive, though her image continues to be seen by music fans around the world who encounter the Atom Heart Mother album cover. The inverted swimmer photograph that Pink Floyd rejected didn't go to waste, as Hypnosis later recycled the concept and offered it to another rock band looking for album artwork. Def Leppard, the British heavy metal group, decided that the surreal image of an upside-down swimmer perfectly captured the mood they wanted for their 1981 album High and Dry, and the photograph became one of their most recognizable album covers. This means that two completely different but equally successful rock albums ended up with artwork that originated from the same Hypnosis brainstorming session, though they took very different approaches to visual presentation. Fact 14. Recording straight into the mixing console. While most electric guitarists rely on amplifiers to shape their sound and create the tonal characteristics that define their playing style, David Gilmour achieved some of his most memorable and iconic guitar tones through an unconventional recording technique that bypassed amplifiers entirely. Instead of plugging his guitar into an amplifier and then placing microphones in front of the speakers to capture the sound, Gilmour would connect his instrument directly into the mixing console at Abbey Road Studios, using only the console's built-in input compression to process and shape the signal before it was recorded to tape. This direct recording approach was particularly unusual during the 1970s, when most rock guitarists believed that amplifiers were essential for achieving a powerful, full-bodied electric guitar sound that would cut through a dense mix of other instruments. The conventional wisdom was that guitar amplifiers, especially when pushed to moderate volume levels, added warmth, harmonic distortion, and dynamic compression that made electric guitars sound more musical and present in recordings, which is why the vast majority of famous guitar recordings from that era feature amplified signals captured by studio microphones. Gilmour's decision to record directly into the console produced a remarkably clean, pure, and intimate guitar tone that became one of the defining sonic characteristics of Pink Floyd's music, particularly on tracks like Shine On You Crazy Diamond, where his opening guitar solo has a crystalline clarity and emotional directness that might have been lost if it had been filtered through amplifier speakers and room acoustics. The input compression available on professional mixing consoles provided just enough signal processing to even out the dynamics of his playing and add a subtle musical character to the sound without overwhelming the natural tone of his guitar and effects pedals. This technique allowed Gilmour to maintain complete control over his guitar sound in the studio environment, since he wasn't dealing with variables like amplifier volume, speaker placement, microphone positioning, or room acoustics that could change the character of his recordings in unpredictable ways. He would later use this same direct recording approach on other Pink Floyd classics, including Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 and Coming Back to Life, demonstrating that some of the most effective recording techniques are often the simplest and most straightforward approaches that focus on capturing the pure essence of the instrument. Fact 15. The Hotel Piglet Rampage. During Pink Floyd's In the Flesh tour in 1977, which promoted their Animals album with its prominent pig themes and imagery, the band encountered one of the most bizarre and expensive incidents of their entire touring career when they reached Munich, Germany. A local concert promoter named Marcel Avram, apparently inspired by the pig motifs that featured so prominently in the album's artwork and stage show, decided to present the band with what he thought would be a charming and thematic gift-a-live piglet that he hoped would serve as a memorable souvenir of their German concert dates. The band members, probably not thinking through the practical implications of accepting a live farm animal as a gift while staying in a luxury hotel, took the piglet back to their accommodations, which happened to feature a room decorated extensively with mirrors on the walls and other reflective surfaces that created an elegant but fragile environment. What the band and the promoter had failed to consider was that piglets, despite their small size and cute appearance, are still fundamentally farm animals with all the natural behaviors and instincts that come with being livestock rather than domesticated pets. Once the piglet was released into the mirrored hotel room, it immediately began behaving exactly like the young pig that it was, exploring its new environment with the enthusiasm and lack of house training that characterizes farm animals. The piglet proceeded to run around the room, knocking into the mirrored walls and causing several mirrors to crack or shatter completely, while simultaneously relieving itself wherever it happened to be standing, leaving a trail of pig excrement across the expensive carpeting and furnishings throughout the suite. The aftermath of this incident was both expensive and embarrassing, as the band's manager Steve O'Rourke was left to deal with the considerable financial consequences of the piglet's destructive tour through the luxury hotel room. O'Rourke had to negotiate with the hotel management to cover the costs of replacing the broken mirrors, deep cleaning or replacing the damaged carpets and furniture, and addressing any other property damage that had resulted from the brief but chaotic presence of an untrained farm animal in an inappropriate indoor environment, making this one of the more unusual and costly items that ever appeared on Pink Floyd's touring expense reports.